Okay, boys and girls, welcome to our second flipped classroom lesson on the important battles in the American Revolution. Tonight we will be talking about the Battle of Saratoga. This happened after the Battle of Trenton. So some things I want you to consider before we start the lesson. What is a turning point? You may have heard this term before, where people say this was the turning point of the game, or this was the turning point of my life, something like that. So after you think about that, who was winning the American Revolution up until this point? Who had most victories on their side? And lastly, I want you to think about why Saratoga could possibly be considered a turning point. Predict what you think might happen at Saratoga to make it a turning point. So first we're going to talk about why Saratoga. Saratoga was strategically picked by the British to attack. If you take a look over here, you can see that the Battle of Saratoga is right there. I want you to think about what's around there that the British would want. If you guessed the Hudson River, you are absolutely correct. The Hudson River flows all the way through New York State down into the Atlantic Ocean. It made it an easy route to ship supplies and troops down and back to Britain or even inland, okay? So what they wanted to do was they wanted to cut off the Americans' supply route. They also wanted to cut off this colony, Massachusetts, from the rest of the colonies. Now, if you think about it, why do you think they would want to cut Massachusetts off from the rest of the colonies? If you said that's because the Sons of Liberty were there, then you are absolutely correct. Something you have to remember, all of the troublemakers were in Massachusetts. You have Sam Adams, John Hancock. This is where the rebellion starts. They think that if they can isolate the troublemakers, then hopefully the rebellion will end. Something else I want you to think about. How would this affect the colonies? Would it affect their morale? Would it affect their supplies? Saratoga was strategic for the British. So some logistics of the battle. Technically, it was two battles, September 19th, 1777 and October 7th, 1777. You could see the British general, and you know he's British by his bright red coat, Johnny Burgoyne. Horatio Gates was the American general, and Benedict Arnold became a hero for the Americans in this battle. Now, Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold did not really see eye to eye on a lot of battle logistics, so they didn't necessarily get along. And this will play a huge part in why Benedict Arnold eventually becomes the most famous trader in all of U.S. history later on in his life. So Johnny Burgoyne, General Johnny, he was stationed up near the Canada border. And you could see on this map, okay, what his route was to go down to Saratoga. He was planning on traveling by the river to get down to Saratoga. Now, if you remember, we talked about why you would travel on the river instead of on land, and that's because it's a lot faster, safer, and easier. You also have access to fresh water if you're traveling on the river. If you take a look at this map, this is a topographical map of New York State. And you could probably take a guess as to what all of these are. These are actually mountain ranges that run through New York State. So you have up here the Adirondack Mountains. You also have the Appalachian Mountains that run through New York State. So what I want you to think about is how the mountains would have affected his travel. Remember, consider how they're getting from place to place. They don't have airplanes, they are marching. These are some pictures taken from the Adirondacks and the Appalachian Mountains, so you can imagine what the terrain was like. He was traveling through this terrain with thousands of men, hundreds of horses, and hundreds of wagons. He was a pretty slow mover. So the British faced some pretty serious setbacks. The first being the terrain, and you just saw the pictures of what it actually looked like, okay? So not only was it mountainous, not only was it rocky, but it was very thick forests that he had to travel over and through. And you have to remember, he's never been to this place before, so he has no idea what it's like. Johnny Burgoyne had over 7,000 soldiers to move. They moved slow. And he had over 300 wagons full of different supplies. You could imagine how difficult it was to get the wagons over these mountains and through the forests. Interesting fact, he had about 30 wagons just for himself. He figured that during the battle he would need his best china and his silver. Because of this, he traveled about 20 miles in 22 days, which is extremely slow. But because the British moved so slow, it gave the Americans plenty of time to prepare. By the time the British reached Saratoga, the Americans were ready for them. They were prepared for them. They knew their strategy. They knew how they would be able to attack the British. So the battle ended in an American victory. You could see in this picture here that is a surrender. And Benedict Arnold actually did the surrender ceremony with Johnny Burgoyne and the British generals. You can see probably George Washington in the back and the rest of his Continental Army. We'll talk a little bit more about this picture tomorrow, but I wanted to just show it to you. Now, why is this all so important? The importance of the battle is it boosted the morale of the American troops. It gave them hope once again that they could win against 7,000 of the best troops in the whole entire world. It was considered a turning point because now we have France in the war. France is confident enough in America's skills to join the war effort on America's side. Now, some things I want you to consider. Why would France want revenge on the British? Okay. What happened previously, before the American Revolution, that would cause France to be upset at Britain? And something I want you to be ready to discuss tomorrow. Why was the French aid so important to the Americans? Why did it help us so much? Please feel free to go back and review any section that you didn't really understand. I'll see you tomorrow.